Hey, good afternoon. Welcome. And whether you're joining me live or watching the recording, I appreciate you sharing your time with me. And I want to ask you to start. What would you like to get out of this time today? We're going to be probably less than 30 minutes. But that's a prompt you to just reflect on that for a second. Again, if you're joining me live, you can share it in the chat. But if you're even watching the recording, what sort of a tangible action you'd like to get to coming out of this? You say, hey, if I learn XYZ things or I understand how to better apply this to my organization, I will do X. And I'll share some suggestions with you on that, but that relates to the three commitments that I want to make to you right off the bat as we get into our time today. So number one is that you're going to learn something. Number two is that if I don't have an answer for you now or in the recording, if I share something that you need more information on or I didn't answer all of your questions, I will not tell you that I know all the answers, but I will get that answer for you. So whether watching, you can follow up after, or in the recording, you can reach out jackson.kerchis@work4.org or visit work4.org and enter the contact page, whatever. And you'll find my contact information, I'm sure, around this video. So that's number two. And number three is let's have fun. As you watch this video, you learn something. Sometimes say if we're not going to have fun, we could just go like file our taxes or something, or start an investment bank or something like that. So it's Friday. Let's have fun. I'm going to briefly touch on who I am and my work. So my name is Jackson. I'm a director at work4.org. We're the only US nonprofit doing advocacy, employer education, and supporting policy around the 4-day work week. I came at this actually from the intersection of happiness and business. So I'm a partner of a training and consulting firm that's essentially sits at that intersection of well-being and how to sort of get the most out of your people, and then military and corporate performance. So at the University of Alabama, when I was a student, I created the world's first happiness major, taught a class on happiness, and then I also, sorry, making sure my microphones are set up here. Taught a class on happiness, won research grants, did that. After school, I was also running a fintech startup and in the sort of management consulting space. After that, I went and lived for 4 months as a Zen monk, spent some time in management, and then decided to kind of take my interest in happiness and well-being and apply that to businesses and organizations. And so naturally, I'm very interested in science-based interventions that support happiness and well-being in the workplace, which then in turn, in almost every case, have bottom line impacts on business performance, operational outcomes like retention, reduced attrition, absenteeism, increased productivity, safety outcomes even, you wouldn't believe. So again, it's all about here drawing out this connection between workplace happiness and performance. And that's really what interests me. And that's what got me interested in the 4-day week, because it is one of those science-based interventions that's been shown to benefit both employer and employee. And that's something you'll learn about in this talk. So there you have it. Let's jump into some slides. I won't share too many of these because, well, frankly, I'm not a big PowerPoint person, but I have a few things to run through with you. So there you have it. So here we are, info session. I'm Jackson again, and my business partner, kind of partner at this nonprofit, I should say, is John Leland, the Chief Strategy Officer of Kickstarter. So to get us started, one of these things is not like the others. Which one and why? Takers. Well, so you see, a year, right? 365 and a quarter days. That's how long it takes for the planet Earth to revolve around the sun. Pregnancy, 9 months, how long it takes for a embryo to develop, reach maturity. So 40-hour work week, that's how long it takes to do a week's worth of work. So you see, the point I'm making is that 2 of these are grounded in an actual physical reality. And the third one, we just made it the F up, right? Like we just made it up. And it was actually made up by this guy, Henry Ford, who about 100 years ago realized that there were marginal increases to productivity, almost no benefit to working the standard kind of 50 or 60 hour weeks. So he dropped his people down to 40, and they were much more effective and engaged. So what is a 4-day work week? And I think this may be the most important slide in the presentation, because I try to emphasize that while the 4-day work week is a great term, it's not so hard and fast, right? It's not literally Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 9 to 5. It's really about rethinking our orientation towards work, time, and productivity. Essentially thinking that, you have this kind of commitment between employer and employee that is saying, hey, we're going to have you work 80% of the hours. So you're starting to decouple inputs and outputs, or time and outcomes. And if, and only if, you achieve 100% of previous productivity, you will get 100% of the same pay and benefits. So breaking that down, right? It starts with this 80 hours thing. And there's some really interesting research, if you look at knowledge worker productivity, that the average knowledge worker is only productive for something in the ballpark of 3 to 4 hours a day. And I know as you're watching this, you might be saying, I'm productive 9 hours a day. And I'm not saying you're not, but we're saying on the average here, in these often bureaucratic white collar environments, a few hours a day. And so the genesis behind the idea then is, well, if you're only productive for a few hours a day, you only need to be productive for 20 or 30 more minutes a few days a week to make up for that 5th day. And it also speaks to this idea of the Pareto principle, right? And if you're not familiar with that, it's the 80-20 rule. Give it a Google search and it'll blow you away. But it essentially says that oftentimes a small number of inputs lead to a disproportionately large number of outputs. So maybe 20% of your business activities lead to 80% of your revenue. 20% of your products or services lead to 80% of your revenue. Same thing with employees. 20% of your employees lead to 80% of your outputs. And it's not always 80-20 or 20-80. Sometimes it's, and they don't have to add to 100, right? It could be 1% of inputs lead to 90% of outputs. But the point is that not all hours are created equal. And so when you think about this, prioritizing those 20% of hours and activities that have the highest benefit to the employer, it makes up for cutting those extra not so important hours. But I will say, this is a good time to remind you that it's also about a pilot, right? We always encourage that you pilot these initiatives first. And so when you're piloting this, you're testing this assumption, and you'll see later on, almost all organizations that have been through this find that this right here, this 80-100-100 rule holds true, but it's a test to make sure in your organization, can we work only 80 hours for 100% of prior productivity? And then exchange, you have that, right? That very explicit commitment between employer and employee. So let's get into the research. After pilot studies involving hundreds of employers across 6 continents and a wide range of industries, we're confident that this is better for both employers and employees. And I know what you might be thinking, and I don't know when the Antarctica pilot is. Not a ton of demand there, but maybe there's some frozen researchers down there who could benefit from working less. But anyway, 4-day work week. Let's talk about business performance first. So, equal or increased productivity. 64% report increased staff productivity, 63% improved quality of work, 8 out of 10 productivity rating. So I'm not going to read all of these, every single slide, bullet points, but I'll talk a little bit through them, right? Essentially what we find is what I started to get on the last slide, right? With this Pareto idea, not all hours are created equal. There's not a linear relationship between inputs and outputs when you're doing knowledge work. Is that all of these employers tend to find that despite working slightly fewer hours, folks are equally or more productive, right? Especially when you think about that productivity is a function of time. So if I do X amount of work in 40 hours and I do that same X amount of work in 32 hours or 35 hours, that means I'm that much more productive on a per hour, or per minute, or per second basis. Lower costs, right? So it cuts down on utility usage, reduced absenteeism. You have a case where Microsoft Japan piloted this and huge savings in electricity alone. And the final one for business performance specifically is that it's going to help with retention, right? Reduced attrition. Staff departures dropped by 57% over the trial period in one of the pilots we looked at. And I think this is important because employers, I think it's easy to underestimate the cost of retention, right? If you're talking about salaried, high-level technical employees, that can range from sometimes 1.5 to 2 times annual salary, because you have to think about lost productivity and impact on the team, right? How it's just slowing everything down and adding complexity. But then you have to think about rehiring costs, marketing and promoting, interviewing, onboarding, retraining, et cetera. And so the more senior these people are, the more this is going to have long-term consequences. But it's also as simple as even things if you're more operational, short-term focused, just overtime, right? It's like, how much money are you paying out in overtime because you don't have adequate staffing, right? Or same thing with burnout, right? If you're losing people to burnout every single year, that's going to translate into financial impact. So those are 3 main levers, right? Equal or increased productivity, lower costs, retention. But we also, of course, want to talk about employee experience, right? And this employee experience things I'll share with you here, these also have second order consequences that ripple back into affecting employer performance or business performance, right? Because when you have employees who are happier and healthier, there is scientific research, if you look at the work of someone like Sean Aker from Harvard, who wrote The Happiness Advantage, that happier, more well employees are more creative, more engaged, and more successful. So you see huge reductions in burnout and huge improvements in mental health, better physical health as well. Nearly half said they weren't as tired and it was easier to get sleep, which is a huge predictor of performance and long-term health, right? When you're thinking about your cost of benefits you're paying out too for employees. And then of course, more than half of American parents who work full-time said they don't have enough time with their kids. So you're giving them back time to be with family, friends, and community. And then I thought this was a pretty interesting one. 49% of millennials and 44% of Gen Z, they use that extra day off to develop their work skills. So they're investing in themselves when you give time back. So again, better for employees as well. But ultimately, the proof is in the pilots, as we say. In the US 2022 pilot, there was a 100% continuation rate. In the UK 2022, there was a 92% continuation rate. So clearly, employers and employees are finding common ground here to say this stuff really works. So now I'm going to put on my John Leland hat, my John Leland disguise, and talk to you as the Chief Strategy Officer of Kickstarter. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, John is a co-director with me at the Work For nonprofit. So we've spent a lot of time going over this together, and I will speak sort of on his behalf on this. But of course, if you need more that I don't cover, just reach out. So the expectation is with good leadership, better practices, better balance and engagement, a shorter work week provides, we can usually get our work done in 32 hours. And that speaks to what I also said earlier, saying this is not a hard and fast thing, right? If you guys usually work 50, maybe you drop to 40, or maybe you drop to 45. The essential idea is that we're starting to decouple time from business objectives and results and give that time back to the people so that everyone's more efficient. All right, so let's talk about leadership. There's multiple stakeholders here. Leaders are primarily responsible for setting clear impact-oriented goals and then establishing metrics for performance. That's something I'll talk more about. Teams then are empowered to do the things needed to meet the expectations set forth by leadership. Cut meetings, find inefficiencies, prioritize work. And then as individuals, right, they're using that time to be better balanced, be more engaged, more energetic, and ultimately have a higher satisfaction with their work life. Okay. So it's not just top down, but bottom up, right? There's multiple stakeholders here when you think about executives, kind of management and teams, departments or business units, and individual workers. This is a recommended timeline, and this is what worked with Kickstarter. Several weeks, going through the design phase and preparation. So in the design phase, you're kind of outlining in your, in some sense, like, how will we know at the end of the pilot that this has been successful or not? What are the metrics we need to see? What are the outcomes we want to track, the kind of KPIs? And how are we going to assess the impact? Preparation, internal comms, getting everything set up and ready to go, you're surveying, then a 3 to 6 month pilot, and then of course the retrospective, where you go back to the design and you say, did this work? Did it not? Do we need to continue the pilot? What do we need to shift, right? But during this pilot, you're also checking and adjusting. So let's talk about what happened at Kickstarter. OKR means objectives and key results. That's a common abbreviation used by, again, John's the chief strategy officer. So his job, right, is setting forth what are the key objectives and results we need to hit in order to support our overall business strategy, and then logging the achievement of those. And so this is the results that came through their pilot. 62% to 95%. Employee retention was 82%, up to 98%. Employee engagement, 51 to 73. Incredible work-life balance. That's a massive jump, right? You're going from less than half of your workforce having adequate work-life balance to over 80% of them. Motivation to go beyond, I also call that in the positive organizational scholarship field, that's organizational citizenship, which is when people are actually volunteering their hearts and their passion to do great work as opposed to just selling their time. Big increase there. And then they ask people, do you see yourself working at Kickstarter in 2 years? Only 40% said yes. After the pilot, 62%. So again, this speaks to the benefit to employees, but more importantly, or perhaps as importantly, but I know as business owners, we tend to think that way, or business leaders, huge benefits for performance as well. And this was feedback from someone at their firm that simply said, hey, the extra time I get with my children who are growing up too fast, right, is beyond valuable. So there's this really deep personal connection here. I'll also touch on Advanced RV because they are a more traditional, we could say, or more, they're a manufacturer in Ohio who did this. I talked to their CEO. So another just tack here on how to implement this, because I know that's a question that's probably top of mind, is he said, look, here's what we did in the manufacturing environment. Step 1, set expectations for productivity. Step 2, empower people and teams to meet those expectations. And step 3 is see step 1 and 2 and repeat, right? So again, I'm not trying to oversimplify this, but at the same time, I don't want it to come across as too complex. I sometimes use the prompt when I'm working with executives or facilitating strategy to say, what would this look like if it were simple? Even if it's not simple, what would it look like? And this was the CEO of Advanced RV. I thought he had a great explanation on it. He said, that's what we do, right? We manufacture these RVs. So we need to look at velocity, right? How fast we're producing these, kind of efficiency, and quantity, right? How many are we making each month or each week or each unit of time? And then quality, right? We need to make sure they're the quality standard. And once you define those as executives and leaders, you simply leave it up to the staff, to the teams, to the business units to achieve those outcomes in whatever way is most effective for them. And he said that's basically what they did. A lot of the nuances of implementation here were actually handled by the staff themselves. Are we going to have people cover shift? And some people work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and others work a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or there's weekend coverage. All of these details, if you set the clear expectations for outcomes, you can let your people handle the inputs. So I'm happy to share more in depth on implementation if you get with us one-on-one, because I get that there are more nuances than that in many cases, but that's just another lens you can take on it. So at this point, I'm going to offer questions. Then as I edit the recording, I'm sure I'll cut this out. But as I said before, if there's anything that I haven't got to, you need it, I'm here for it. So let's get to the final point of the so what here. What are we going to do coming out of this? Well, 2 options. Number 1 is we have a resource. I'll share my screen again, actually. We have a resource that we can share here. There we go. Whoops. On taking this to your employer, right? So if you're watching this and you may not be at that final decision-making level, or you have others that need to be on board, we have this resource for you here. If you go to workfor.org and go to resources under employee resources, and you get the full step-by-step guide, right? This is a good place to start. So it's basically saying, look, here is our view of the situation, right? If you bring this work to your leadership team, right, you are bringing to the table a topic that's essential to the conversation about the future of work, right? In shaping the infrastructure in which business strategies operate. So just bringing this to the table is a win, right? And we don't expect you to try to sell it, but it's simply creating a discussion around it, right? You want leaders to feel invested in it. You want to just get some curiosity, right? In the first couple of weeks, we share some resources there that help generate curiosity. We have several case studies here for different sectors or industries of companies who've done this, because that's a common objective is, hey, who's done this in our space, right? Real estate, consulting, tech. We share some emails here that you can use to spark conversation. And then next month is advancing the conversation. Well, why are we doing this? Tying it to business outcomes. And then finally, starting the adventure, right? So you get a gang together, you get a team together of champions for this, and then you essentially can reach out to us for support, but then you define how will we know if this is successful or not, right? That's your design. And then you start considering a test, right? Whether you execute it yourselves, or again, we have some resources that we can help you with to support that. And that's what I'll touch on now, is that if you are further down the line, or you're a business decision maker and you really think you want to engage in this, reach out to our organization, talk to me. We have some references or recommendations about if you need an external partner to support you in this implementation. We can talk you through if you want to work with like the kind of larger global foundation and their university partners who do research, or if you want a bit more of a bespoke solution, or if you just want to talk to us and handle it internally, we're happy to support you. So there you have your actions, right? You can either refer to that guide and kind of look at how can I create some conversation here around this for my organization, or move forward and start to investigate a test. So coming to a close, I told you earlier, I think that I would bring this back a little bit to my work in happiness and well-being. And I focus on happiness and well-being as a lever to drive business outcomes, but I'm also just a person. I've written a couple books that are more just for people, right? How to stick to meditation is one of them. I do some writing and work around kind of personal stuff. And I want to make maybe a final personal tie here, because we talked already. I think it's very clear that there's benefit for this to the employer and to the employee, but how about you? How about you watching this? Well, often in my happiness talks, I reference a really interesting study, and you can Google it, but it's basically this, it was a hospice worker who had some background in research, I believe. I don't know if it was social work or whatever, but she wrote this publication called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And you're like, where is he going with this? This is a little dramatic, but stay with me. Top 5 regrets of the dying. Number 1 was, I wish I had the courage to be true to myself and not live the life that others expected of me. Number 2, I wish I would have worked less or not worked so hard. And number 3, I wish I would have stayed in touch with old friends. So I think all of those relate in no small part, right? They're pretty significant and relate to our own orientation towards our working lives. And I sum it up by saying we ought to work to live and not live to work, right? So the challenge here, a lot of what we're doing is changing our relationship to work to say, I can still be successful, you can still be successful, without what often happens, unfortunately, especially in competitive organizations, or when you are more senior decision maker in an organization, you can have this success without sacrificing the other areas of life that are absolutely essential. And I hope that by, again, changing our relationship to work time and work productivity, that we set ourselves up kind of culturally and personally to live in a way that has fewer regrets and a happier, healthier relationship to our work. So I'll end with a final story on this note. This is one of my favorite ones I share in my talks, but I was a young man, so about 14 maybe, and I was out on a canoe trip with my best friend Luke. And so we're out there, it was like April, water's freezing cold. There's these kind of white caps on the lake, right? We're out there in the canoe. It's one of my favorite dance moves, actually. Explains why I'm still single. No, I'm kidding. So we're out in the canoe, right? We flip, right? We hit the water and it's just ice cold, like shock instantly, right? And we're kind of grabbing onto the boats, paddling, panicking, right? And so we're hanging on. And about a couple hundred yards away, there's just a single fisherman, like this old guy just on his boat. So I'm, hanging on here, crawling, kind of paddling, and I'm like, hey, hey. Fisherman looks back, hey. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like I start waving him in, and he kind of looks around, and he's like, yeah. And I'm like, no, no, like we trying to signal, like we flipped. And he looks back one more time and says, flipped. No, so finally he comes over, right? We're pulled up there. We're saying, finally, oh, thank you for you. It's so good you arrived. We're freezing like we're gonna die, right? So he pulls up next to us in his boat, throws on his waders, steps out of the boat, jumps in the water. The water's up to about here, flips the canoe over, gets back in his boat, drives away. The lesson there, right, is that oftentimes our perceptions are not reality, right? We think something is impossible, or we think something's going to derail our progress, or we just think it can't be so, and it is so. So as you come out of this training, this talk, whatever you want to call it, is that my hope for you is that you as a leader, when you think about changing this relationship between work and life, or work time and productivity, that the water is not as deep as you think, that this is absolutely possible. And I hope that you'll take the leap and dare to try as we shape the future of work. So thanks for watching, and reach out to us if you need anything.